Welcome back, everyone. We're diving deep today, and it's into critical thinking. We've got in Tuhovsky's book, Critical Thinking. Think clearly in a world of agendas, bad science, and information overload. And it's like, you know how we're always talking about information overload? Well, this book is like a mental toolkit
Yeah.
to deal with that,
It's
to
like,
help us navigate it all.
like a survival guide for the mind. Right?
Exactly. And this book, it's got these mind-blowing examples that'll really make you rethink how you see things. Like, did you know most Americans can't even tell the difference between a scientific theory and a superstition?
Seriously.
Yeah. Or that we actually have way more than five senses.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
It's true. And then there's this. Get this. You're less likely to help someone who needs it when you're in a crowd.
Oh, the bystander effect.
Yes, the bystander effect. And we're going to get into all that today. Now, to help us unpack all this, I mean, not just what Tuhovsky says, but why it actually matters. We've got our resident brain expert here, so let's jump in. Tuhovsky starts off talking about why critical thinking is so important now, today. What do you think about that?
Well, you think about our ancestors. They relied on instinct, fight or flight. Those gut feelings, those were essential, right?
Right, back when we had to dodge saber-toothed tigers.
Exactly. But
Therefore.
those same instincts, they can really mess us up today. We face a different kind of jungle now, an information jungle.
So we need to update our mental software.
Precisely. Tuhovsky, he uses this really powerful example. The Salem witch trials back then. They were burning women at the stake. And it was based on fear and superstition, not evidence.
It's hard to believe that was ever considered normal.
Right, but that's Tuhovsky's point. Critical thinking. It helps us move away from fear-based decisions and towards more rational ones, evidence-based ones.
Okay, I'm seeing how this applies to everyday life. But how does this connect to that statistic about Americans and the scientific theories versus superstitions?
It shows how much we still rely on instinctual thinking.
Sure.
We're just bombarded with information. It's easy to get caught up in emotions or biases without even realizing it.
So it's like we're on autopilot most of the time.
Yeah.
But critical
Yeah.
thinking helps us become aware, right?
Exactly. It's like we went from believing in dragons to understanding flight through science. It's that same spirit of inquiry, asking why, seeking evidence. That's what we need to apply to everything.
Okay, I like that. So let's talk about one of the most, I think, intriguing concepts in the book, the bystander effect.
Oh, yeah.
This is where it gets really interesting.
Have you ever been in a crowded place and you see something happen? Maybe someone needs help, but you hesitate to step in. You're not alone. That's the bystander effect.
Yeah, it's that feeling of, someone else will do it.
Exactly. Tuhovsky uses the story of Kitty Genovese. She was murdered, and there were 38 witnesses, and none of them intervened.
38 witnesses. That's just mind-boggling.
It's a chilling example of how social pressures can override our instincts to help.
Wow.
Psychologists, they've identified two main reasons for this. The first is diffusion of responsibility. The more people there are, the less responsible each individual feels.
So everyone assumes someone else will call 911.
Right. And the second reason is the need to conform. We look to others for cues on how to behave. If everyone else is doing nothing, we assume that doing nothing is the right thing to do, even if it feels wrong.
It's like a social paralysis. So no one wants to stand out.
Right.
Okay, now, Tuhovsky talks about these two systems of thinking, system one and system two.
Right.
It's like having a little angel and devil on your shoulders. Or not.
Good analogy. Think of system one as that voice in your head that shouts, do it.
Careful when you see a delicious dessert, even though you're trying to eat healthy. It's quick, impulsive, and it loves mental shortcuts. So system one is the devil whispering those tempting shortcuts.
Well, not necessarily a devil, but it's definitely the system that's prone to biases and impulsive decisions, like your automatic startle response to a loud noise. That's system one in action.
Okay, so what about system two? Is that the angel urging us to think things through?
System two is slower, more deliberate. It's the one that kicks in when you're solving a complex problem or trying to resist temptation, like trying not to turn around when someone tells you not to look.
Right. It's that battle between logic and impulse.
Exactly. Tuhovsky uses this clever bat and ball problem to illustrate how these two systems work. Imagine a bat and ball cost $1.10, and the bat cost $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost?
That's trickier than it sounds. I'm guessing most people would say 10 cents.
That's system one jumping to a conclusion. If you use system two, actually pause to do the math. You'll see the ball costs 5 cents.
Got it. So system one is all about those mental shortcuts. what Tuhovsky calls heuristics.
Precisely. Heuristics are those rules of thumb that help us make quick decisions. But as we saw with the bat and ball problem, they can also lead to errors, especially when dealing with complex issues.
Tuhovsky gives some really interesting examples of these heuristics, like anchoring bias and the availability heuristic.
Imagine you're negotiating the price of a car, and the seller starts by throwing out a ridiculously high number. That number, even though it's unreasonable, it becomes an anchor, influencing your perception of what a fair price might be.
So they set a high bar, and everything else seems reasonable in comparison.
Exactly.
That's sneaky.
And the availability heuristic. That's when we judge the likelihood of something, based on how easily examples come to mind. If you've just seen a news report about a shark attack, you might overestimate the chances of being attacked, even though it's statistically rare.
Right. Those vivid images stick in our minds.
Exactly.
Let's think something is more common than it actually is.
These heuristics, they're helpful for everyday decisions, but they can lead us astray. When we're dealing with more complex or important issues,
Tuhovsky argues that these mental shortcuts, they're at the root of a lot of our irrational choices, from our shopping habits to our political opinions, and that's where critical thinking comes in.
absolutely.
Now, I'm curious about this concept of priming. It sounds almost like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Priming is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's about how exposure to certain ideas, words, or images can unconsciously influence our thoughts and actions.
Like planting a seed in someone's mind without them even realizing it.
Exactly. Tuhovsky shares some intriguing examples. In one study, participants were primed with words associated with old age, like Florida and bingo. Guess what happened?
Did they suddenly start craving early bird special?
They actually started walking slower.
What?
Yeah. It's as if their brains were telling their bodies to act old.
Wow, that's wild.
Yeah, in another study, just being exposed to images of money led people to act more selfishly.
So seeing dollar signs can make you less generous.
It definitely raises questions about how advertising and media can impact our behavior, often without us even realizing it.
Okay, so instincts, heuristics, priming. Now let's dive into social proof and groupthink.
Okay.
These sound like powerful forces.
Think about it. Have you ever applauded at a play, even if you didn't enjoy it? Just because everyone else was doing it?
Yeah, I think we've all been there.
That's social proof in action.
Right. It's that feeling of if everyone else is doing it, it must be the right thing to do.
And this tendency to conform to the actions of others can have a huge impact on our choices. Like charities, they often use long lists of donors to encourage others to contribute. They're playing on that desire to follow the crowd.
So social pressure can actually be used for good.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it can also lead to negative consequences, especially when it morphs into what Tuhovsky calls groupthink.
Tuhovsky uses a pretty chilling example to illustrate this, the third wave experiment.
Oh yeah, the third wave experiment. It took place in a high school classroom. The teacher, he created a movement with specific rules and rituals. And what's shocking is how quickly the students adopted this fabricated ideology. It shows the power of groupthink to override critical thinking and even moral judgment.
It's a real-life example of how easily we can be swayed by group mentality.
Exactly. And in the book, Tuhovsky outlines 8 symptoms of groupthink, highlighting the dangers of suppressing dissent and the illusion of invulnerability that can arise in groups.
So how can we guard against groupthink?
It's about being aware of the power of social influence, being willing to question the group consensus, and speaking up when we disagree.
It's about having the courage to think for ourselves.
Exactly.
Even when it's uncomfortable.
And sometimes that means seeking out diverse perspectives and challenging our own assumptions.
I like that. So Tuhovsky's next chapter tackles a topic that's particularly relevant today: bad science.
Oh boy.
This is where we get into the world of marketing ploys and biased trials, right?
Precisely. Tuhovsky exposes how scientific language and authority are often misused to promote dubious products and practices. He gives the example of foot detox baths. They claim to remove toxins from your body. Sounds scientific, right?
It does. I've seen those advertised everywhere. Are you telling me they're bogus?
Tuhovsky explains that the claims behind many detox products are based on pseudoscience and have no real scientific backing.
So it's about being critical of those marketing claims and looking for actual evidence.
Exactly. He also dives into the issue of biased drug trials, where pharmaceutical companies may influence research to favor their products.
So it's not always about genuine scientific breakthroughs, but about profit motives.
Unfortunately, that can be the case. And Tuhovsky raises concerns about drug trials. conducted in developing countries, where there's a higher risk of exploitation.
That's disturbing.
It's a serious ethical issue. Tuhovsky urges us to be more discerning consumers
Yeah.
of scientific information, question claims, and seek independent verification.
It's like doing our own research,
Yeah.
not just taking things at face value.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to the final challenge Tuhovsky addresses, navigating a world of fake news.
Oh, that's a big one.
This is a big one. It feels like we're bombarded with misinformation these days. It's hard to know what to believe.
It can feel like we're drowning in information, much of it unreliable. And Tuhovsky points out that several factors contribute to the spread of fake news.
Like what? I'm ready to fight back against the fakes.
Well, there's the commercialization of media, where sensationalism often trumps accuracy. We also have a decline in investigative journalism, with many outlets relying on press releases or wire agencies, rather than digging deeper.
So it's cheaper and easier to just repeat what everyone else is saying.
Unfortunately, yes. And then, of course, there's social media, where misinformation spreads like wildfire.
It's the perfect breeding ground for fake news, those catchy headlines. And emotional stories go viral in an instant.
Exactly. But Tuhovsky gives us some practical strategies to fight back. He says we need to scrutinize sources, read beyond the headlines, and be aware of our own biases.
So don't just blindly trust anything that pops up on your feed.
Right. Check the website. Look at the author. Do they have a known agenda? And remember, even a source you usually trust can get things wrong.
Okay, so we need to be more skeptical. Do our own fact-checking.
Exactly. It's about taking responsibility for the information we consume. And that's really at the heart of Tuhovsky's message. Critical thinking is essential for navigating this complex world.
This deep dive, it's already given me so much to think about. But, one thing that struck me is how Tuhovsky emphasizes the role of emotions in decision-making. I always thought emotions were the enemy of rational thought.
That's a common misconception. We often think of being logical as being totally calm and detached. But Tuhovsky makes a great point. Emotions, they aren't inherently bad.
So we shouldn't try to suppress our emotions.
They can actually be valuable sources of information and motivation. Think about it. How many times has a gut feeling steered you in the right direction?
Plenty of times. But I've also made some terrible decisions based on emotion.
That's why it's about understanding how emotions influence our thinking, not just ignoring them. Tuhovsky delves into this concept of interoception, which is our ability to sense our own internal bodily states.
You mean like our heart rate, breathing, those physical sensations?
Exactly, those sensations. They can give us clues about our emotions and how they're shaping our perceptions.
So it's about being in tune with our bodies and how they react to things.
Exactly.
Sometimes I get this, like knot in my stomach, when something feels off, even if I can't explain why.
That's your body sending you a signal. And learning to recognize those signals is a key part of critical thinking. It's about being aware of how emotions, even subconscious ones, might be biasing our judgment.
Okay, so it's not just about logic and reasoning, but also about recognizing those emotional undercurrents.
Precisely. And Tuhovsky says one of the biggest hurdles to critical thinking is our own biases.
We all have them, right? Those blind spots.
Absolutely. But Tuhovsky gives us some strategies for identifying and challenging those biases. The first is deceptively simple. Slow down your thinking.
Wait, you mean pause?
It sounds simple, but it's incredibly effective. When we react impulsively, we tend to rely on those gut instincts and ingrained biases. But when we take a moment to step back, reflect, and consider other viewpoints, we're more likely to make reasoned judgments.
It's like giving our system that slow, deliberate part of our minds, a chance to catch up with our impulsive system 1.
Exactly. Another strategy Tuhovsky recommends is actively seeking out information. That challenges our beliefs.
Ooh, that sounds tough.
It is.
It's so much easier to just stick with what we already believe.
But if we're serious about critical thinking, we need to be willing to confront those biases head on. Exposing ourselves to different perspectives is key.
It's about stepping outside our comfort zones, being open to changing our minds.
Absolutely. It can be uncomfortable, even a little scary. But that's where real learning and understanding happen.
Now, Tuhovsky also dives into the concept of the law of least effort, which, honestly, I relate to on a spiritual level.
I think we all do. It's the idea that our brains are wired to conserve energy and take the easiest path.
So we're all a bit lazy when it comes to thinking.
Our brains are constantly looking for shortcuts, ways to simplify complex information. Think of it as efficiency. but sometimes it goes too far.
Which is why we fall for those mental heuristics so easily.
Exactly.
Our brains just love those shortcuts.
And while this tendency is helpful in many situations, Tuhovsky warns that over-reliance on mental shortcuts can lead to poor decisions, especially when dealing with important matters.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between efficiency and accuracy in our thinking.
Precisely. And that's where critical thinking steps in. It's about recognizing when we need to engage system 2, put in the mental effort, to analyze information thoroughly.
Okay, so Tuhovsky dedicates a whole chapter to confirmation bias, which sounds like a sneaky trap our brains set for us.
It's one of the most common cognitive biases. It's that tendency to seek out information that confirms our existing beliefs, even when the evidence might suggest otherwise.
So it's like we're seeing what we want to see, even if it's not really there.
Exactly. And this can lead us down a dangerous path, making decisions based on flawed information and ignoring anything that contradicts our cherished beliefs.
Tuhovsky uses a study about nylon stockings to illustrate this, which is a pretty surprising example.
It is. Participants were asked to rate the quality of several pairs of identical nylon stockings. The catch: they consistently rated the stocking on the right as higher quality, even though they were all the same.
Wait, so their choices were influenced simply by the position of the stockings?
Precisely. When asked to explain their choices, participants came up with all sorts of reasons: the texture, the feel, but none mentioned the position. They were completely unaware of how this irrelevant factor swayed their judgment.
That's scary.
It shows how easily we can fool ourselves into thinking we're being objective when we're not.
And confirmation bias can have serious consequences, especially when forming opinions about people.
Right.
Tuhovsky talks about the halo effect, which also highlights how first impressions can color our judgments.
The halo effect is that tendency to form an overall positive or negative impression of someone based on a single trait. If we find someone attractive, we might assume they're also intelligent, kind, and trustworthy.
It's like that saying, what is beautiful is good. But does this really play out in real life?
Studies have shown that attractive people often receive preferential treatment in many areas, from job interviews to legal proceedings.
Wow, so our judgments can be swayed by something as superficial as looks.
Unfortunately, yes. And the halo effect can work both ways. A negative first impression, based on a single trait, can make us overlook someone's positive qualities.
It's like those negative first impressions can be really hard to shake off.
They can. But Tuhovsky provides strategies for overcoming this, like focusing on specific behaviors and actively seeking diverse perspectives to get a more complete picture of a person.
So looking beyond those surface-level judgments, really trying to understand the individual.
Exactly. And that's a core principle of critical thinking, being willing to challenge our assumptions and see things from multiple angles.
He also talks about the endowment effect, which sounds like something that could really impact our financial decisions.
The endowment effect is our tendency to value something more highly, simply because we own it.
Like that feeling of, it's mine, so it must be worth more.
Precisely. Studies have shown that people are often willing to pay more to keep something they already own than they would pay to acquire it in the first place. Tuhovsky uses a fascinating example with basketball tickets.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Students who won basketball tickets in a lottery wouldn't sell them for less than $2,400, but students who didn't win wouldn't pay more than $170 for those same tickets.
Wow, that's a huge difference. So just the act of owning something dramatically inflates its value in our minds.
Exactly, and Tuhovsky suggests this effect extends beyond material possessions to our ideas and opinions.
So we cling to our beliefs, even flawed ones, because they feel like ours.
Precisely. And that can be a major obstacle to critical thinking, as it makes us resistant to changing our minds, even when presented with compelling evidence.
It's like we're emotionally invested in our beliefs. Okay, now I'm really curious about this concept of somatic markers. What are those?
Somatic markers are those bodily sensations we associate with specific experiences or memories. Think of them as emotional shortcuts, influencing our decisions without us even realizing it.
So our bodies are remembering things our minds might not be consciously aware of.
Exactly. And those physical sensations, they can trigger powerful emotional responses that sway our thinking.
Can you give an example of how this works?
Tuhovsky uses the example of Andrek's toilet paper. You know, the one with the Labrador puppy mascot.
Of course.
That's exactly the point. The puppies. They evoke feelings of warmth, comfort, family. And those positive emotions, even though they're not logically connected to toilet paper, they can influence consumers to choose Andrek's over other brands.
So it's creating a kind of halo effect for the brand, but through emotional association rather than logic.
Precisely. It highlights how powerful those subconscious influences can be in shaping our choices.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground, from biases to emotional shortcuts. Now, let's circle back to that timely topic of bad science.
It's a crucial one. Tuhovsky exposes how scientific language and authority are often misused to promote questionable products and practices.
Like those detox products that
Yeah.
claim to cleanse your body of toxins. Those are everywhere these days.
Exactly.
So-
Tuhovsky points out that many of those detox claims are based on pseudoscience and lack real scientific basis.
So it's about being a savvy consumer, looking for real evidence to back up those marketing claims.
Absolutely. He also delves into the issue of biased drug trials, highlighting how pharmaceutical companies can influence research and reporting to favor their products.
So it's not always about genuine scientific breakthroughs, but about profit motives.
Unfortunately, that can be the case.
Yeah.
And Tuhovsky raises concerns about drug trials being conducted in developing countries where there's a higher risk of exploitation.
It's like those companies are preying on vulnerable populations to get their products to market.
It's a serious ethical concern. Tuhovsky stresses the importance of being discerning consumers of scientific information, questioning claims, and seeking independent verification.
So it's about doing our own research,
Yeah.
not just blindly accepting what we see or hear.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the final challenge Tuhovsky addresses: navigating a world of fake news.
Oh, this is a big one.
This is a big one. It feels like we're bombarded with misinformation these days. It's tough to know what to believe.
It's tough. It really is. It's like we're drowning in information.
Yeah.
And so much of it is unreliable.
So how do we fight back? How do we navigate this?
Tuhovsky, he gives us some strategies.
Okay, good.
One of the most important things, and it sounds simple,
Yeah.
is to be curious.
Curious.
Yeah, instead of just accepting information passively, approach it with a healthy dose of skepticism.
Okay.
Ask yourself, where did this information come from?
Right.
Who's the source? What's their agenda? Is there evidence to support their claims? Are there other possible explanations?
So it's like we need to turn on our inner detective.
Exactly.
Always be looking for clues.
That kind of critical questioning. It's our best defense against misinformation, against biases,
Yeah.
against manipulation.
And we can apply that to like everything, right?
And everything.
News articles, social media posts.
Conversations with friends, everything.
Now, we've talked about biases, but we also mentioned being aware of our emotional responses. How do emotions play into this whole critical thinking thing?
Well, remember, emotions can be powerful drivers of our behavior, but they can also cloud our judgment.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's crucial to pay attention to how we're feeling when we're evaluating information or making decisions.
So if I'm feeling like angry
Mhm.
or scared, that could be a sign that my emotions are kind of getting in the way.
Exactly. In those moments, take a step back, acknowledge those emotions, and try to look at the situation from a more neutral perspective.
Give ourselves a chance to cool down.
Precisely. Tuhovsky, he has another helpful strategy. Consider the opposite.
Consider the opposite.
Yeah. If you're inclined to believe something, try to find arguments against it.
Oh, interesting.
It's a powerful way to challenge your own biases and broaden your perspective. It forces you to consider alternative explanations and weigh the evidence more objectively.
It's like deliberately playing devil's advocate with yourself.
Exactly. It can be really effective. In combating confirmation bias, it helps us break free from those echo chambers and consider viewpoints that might make us uncomfortable.
So, like, if I'm reading an article and it's confirming all my beliefs, I should actively look for something that says the opposite.
Yeah. Look for articles from reputable sources that present different perspectives. But remember, even those opposing viewpoints need to be evaluated critically.
Okay, so don't just blindly accept those either.
Right.
It's about training our minds to be more flexible,
Yes.
open to new information, different ways of thinking.
That's the essence of critical thinking. It's not about being right all the time. It's about constantly questioning, evaluating, and refining our understanding of the world.
It's a lifelong journey, right?
It is a learning and growing.
And unlearning, too.
And unlearning, yeah.
Tuhovsky reminds us that critical thinking requires humility.
Humility.
We need to be willing to admit when we're wrong, learn from our mistakes, and adjust our beliefs.
It's about recognizing
Yeah.
that we don't have all the answers,
Yeah.
that our understanding of the world is always evolving.
Precisely. And that kind of humility, it's essential for intellectual growth and development. It keeps us open to new possibilities and prevents us from getting stuck in rigid ways of thinking.
This deep dive is giving me so much to think about. I'm feeling inspired to actually put some of these critical thinking strategies into practice. Any final words of wisdom?
Just remember, it's a process. Don't get discouraged. If you find yourself slipping back into old habits of thinking, critical thinking is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets.
I like that. So to leave our listeners with something to ponder, what's one final takeaway from Tuhovsky's book that we haven't touched on yet? Well, one thing that really struck me was his challenge to analyze a recent news story or advertisement through the lens of critical thinking.
Ooh, that's good.
It's a real-world test of our critical thinking skill.
Yeah. A real-world test.
Exactly. Look for potential biases, misleading claims, attempts at emotional manipulation. Put those detective skills to work.
I'm ready to start analyzing everything now.
By applying these skills to the information we encounter every day, we can become more discerning consumers of information, more responsible citizens, and ultimately, more thoughtful and informed individuals.
Well said. So there you have it. Deep divers, we've explored the fascinating and, let's be honest, sometimes challenging world of critical thinking. With Ian Tuhovsky as our guide, we've learned that it's not just about being smart or logical. It's about cultivating a mindset of curiosity, humility, and open-mindedness. It's about questioning assumptions, challenging biases, and being willing to change our minds when presented with new evidence. And most importantly, it's a journey we can all embark on, no matter our background or level of expertise. So go out there, deep divers, and start thinking critically.
It's a real challenge, it is. But you know what? Tuhovsky, he doesn't just point out the problems. He offers solutions.
Okay, so what are some of those solutions? How do we navigate this world of fake news?
One of the most powerful tools, and it might sound too simple, is curiosity.
Curiosity.
Yeah, be curious. Instead of just accepting information, passively, question it.
Question everything.
Question everything. Where did this information come from? Who's the source? What's their agenda? Do they have evidence? What are some other possible explanations?
So it's like we need to be detectives.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that kind of critical questioning is really our best defense against misinformation, against biases, against manipulation.
Oh, you can apply that to everything, right?
To everything.
Everything we read, everything you see, conversations you have.
Now, we've talked a lot about biases,
right?
But we also mentioned being aware of our own emotions.
Yeah.
So how do emotions factor into critical thinking?
Remember, emotions, they can drive our behavior, but they can also cloud our judgment.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So it's important to pay attention to how we're feeling when we're evaluating information or when we're making decisions.
So like if I'm feeling really angry about something or scared, maybe that's a sign to step back.
Exactly. In those moments, just pause. Acknowledge those emotions and try to see things from a more neutral perspective.
It's like giving ourselves a chance to cool down.
Precisely. Tuhovsky, he suggests another strategy. Consider the opposite.
Consider the opposite.
Yeah. So if I'm really inclined to believe something, I should try to find reasons why I might be wrong.
Exactly. It's a way to challenge your own biases and see the whole picture.
Oh, I like that.
It forces you to think about other explanations and weigh the evidence.
Like playing devil's advocate with yourself.
Exactly. It helps us break free from those echo chambers and consider viewpoints that might make us uncomfortable.
So if I'm reading an article and it's confirming everything I already think, I should look for an article that says the opposite.
Absolutely. Look for articles. From reliable sources, of course, that offer different perspectives. But remember, evaluate those opposing views critically, too.
Right. Don't just blindly accept those either.
It's about training your mind to be more flexible.
More open.
More open to new information.
Different ways of thinking.
Exactly. And that's really what critical thinking is all about. It's not about being right all the time. It's about constantly questioning, evaluating, refining your understanding.
Yeah, it's a journey.
It's a journey.
A lifelong journey.
And Tuhovsky reminds us that critical thinking requires humility.
Humility.
We need to be able to admit when we're wrong and learn from our mistakes.
That's tough sometimes.
It is, but it's essential for growth. It keeps us open to new ideas, new possibilities.
This deep dive has been amazing. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools to approach the world with. So any final thoughts?
Just remember, it's a process. It takes time. It takes practice. Don't get discouraged if you find yourself slipping back into old habits. Critical thinking is a skill, and like any skill, it takes effort, and it takes practice.
I love that analogy. So to leave our listeners with something to ponder, what's one takeaway from Tuhovsky's book that maybe we haven't explicitly mentioned yet?
He has this challenge to look at a recent news story or an advertisement through the lens of critical thinking.
Ooh, I like that.
It's like a real-world test.
Yeah, a real-world test. Apply everything we've learned.
Exactly. Look for those biases. Look for misleading claims. See if they're trying to manipulate you emotionally. Put those detective skills to work.
I'm ready to start analyzing everything now.
And by doing that, we become better consumers of information, more responsible citizens, and ultimately, more thoughtful and informed individuals.
So well said. There you have it, deck divers. We've explored the world of critical thinking. With Ian Tuhovsky's book as our guide, we've learned that it's not just about being smart. It's about being curious, being humble, and being open to new ideas. It's about questioning everything and being willing to change our minds when the evidence demands it. So go out there, be curious, ask questions, and never stop thinking critically. Until next time, deep divers appear.